My name is Cassandra Wells, and I discovered my husband wasn't just cheating, he was living an entirely separate existence I'd never suspected. The second phone I found in his gym bag wasn't just for affairs, it was a gateway into a world where he had a different name, a different job, and different promises to different women. I found the phone on a Wednesday morning, tucked into the side pocket of David's gym bag, the one he swore he'd stopped using months ago. He'd left for a business trip to Chicago at dawn, kissing my forehead with that practiced tenderness that I now realized had always been a performance. I was doing laundry, mundane, domestic, the kind of task that defined my role in our marriage, when I picked up his gym bag to wash it. Something heavy shifted inside the pocket. The phone was an older iPhone, nothing like the sleek model David carried for work. It had a cracked screen protector and a generic black case. I turned it on, expecting it to be dead, but it powered up immediately to a lock screen showing 47 unread messages. My hands started shaking before I even unlocked it. The passcode was our anniversary, of course. It was another layer of mockery I didn't understand yet. The messages loaded, and my world tilted sideways. Marcus, when are you coming back to Atlanta? I miss you. Stephanie James, my daughter wants to meet you. Are you ready for that step? Nicole David, thanks for last night. You'll make me feel alive again. Alicia. 3 different names, 3 different women, 3 different conversations were happening simultaneously. Each woman believing she was in a monogamous relationship with the man I called my husband. I sat on the laundry room floor, the phone clutched in my hands, and scrolled through months of messages. David wasn't just cheating, he was running cons. He'd told Stephanie he was a venture capitalist from Seattle, who traveled for work. Nicole thought he was a divorced single father building a consulting business. Alicia believed he was a widower who'd lost his wife to cancer. Each lie was elaborate, detailed, and maintained with the kind of dedication that should have gone into our actual marriage. He had photos for each identity, different backgrounds, different clothes, always careful never to show his face too clearly. He had backstories. He had fake business cards. He'd created entire fictional lives, and then I found the bank statements in his email on that phone. Accounts I didn't know existed, under names I didn't recognize. Money moving in patterns I couldn't immediately understand. Deposits from women, withdrawals for expenses, transfers between accounts. My husband wasn't just a cheater, he was a con artist, and these women were his marks. I kept scrolling, my breath coming faster, my vision tunneling. I found messages to men too, not romantic, but transactional. Discussions about investments and opportunities sounded like pyramid schemes or fraud. David had his hands in multiple operations, each more illegal than the last. Then I found messages about me, to someone named Trevor. The wife still doesn't suspect anything. Her inheritance from her grandmother, cleared last month, that $100,000, should be able to move it to the offshore accounts by next quarter, without her noticing. My inheritance, the money my grandmother had left me, the nest egg David had convinced me to put into our joint investment account for better returns. Money I'd trusted him to manage because he was so good with finances, because he loved me. After all, we were partners. He'd been planning to steal it. Maybe already had. I felt something crack inside me. Not my heart, but something deeper, my sense of reality. My understanding of the past 6 years. Nothing had been real. Our courtship, our wedding, our life together, it had all been a long con. And I'd been too trusting, too naive, too in love to see it. David called me an hour later from Chicago, his voice warm and familiar. Hey babe, just landed. Miss you already. I made my voice light, normal, exactly what he expected. Miss you too. How long will you be gone? Just 3 days. I'll be home Friday night. Love you. Love you too, I said. And the lie tasted like ashdot. I had 3 days, while he was out of the house, believing I was still the oblivious wife he'd been manipulating for years. 3 days to figure out exactly how deep this went and exactly how to destroy him. I wasn't going to confront him. I wasn't going to give him the chance to lie his way out or disappear before facing consequences. I was going to systematically dismantle every aspect of his double life, expose every lie, and make sure he paid for it in ways that would haunt him forever. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at my laptop with David's second phone and started mapping out his entire operation. The phone had apps I'd never seen him use, encrypted messaging services, dating sites under multiple profiles, financial apps for accounts I didn't know existed. I screenshotted everything, uploading it all to a secure cloud storage he couldn't access. Evidence, documentation, ammunition. The dating profiles were elaborate. Marcus Chen was 42, a venture capitalist who loved hiking and Thai food. James Morrison was 45, a divorced father of two who was looking for a woman to build a life with. David Harrison, using his real first name but a fake last name, was a widower, 40, still grieving but ready to love again. Each profile had been active for years. He wasn't just recently cheating, he'd been running this con the entire time we'd been together, maybe even before we met. I cross-referenced the women he was messaging with social media. Stephanie in Atlanta was a pharmaceutical sales rep, recently divorced, with money from her settlement. Nicole in Charlotte was a successful real estate agent, single mother, raising her daughter alone. Alicia in Nashville was a doctor, a widow whose husband had died 3 years ago, leaving her a substantial life insurance payout. He was targeting wealthy, vulnerable women who had money and emotions he could exploit. The financial trail was even more disturbing. I accessed the account statements and found he'd borrowed money from at least 7 different women over the past 3 years. Small amounts at first, a few thousand for a business emergency, then larger sums. One woman had given him $50,000 for an investment opportunity that, I could tell from the transfers, had simply moved into David's personal accounts. My husband wasn't just a cheater, he was running a romance scam operation, and I'd been his cover story the entire time. The stable, loving marriage was part of his credibility, proof to these women that he was trustworthy, established, and real. I also found messages between David and Trevor, the man he'd mentioned, regarding my inheritance. Trevor was apparently his partner in something bigger. They discussed Mark's exit strategies and moving assets before detection. They mentioned other names, other cons, a network of fraud that went beyond just David's romantic manipulations. There was a message from 2 weeks ago that made my blood run cold. Need to speed up the timeline with see her grandmother's money cleared. If we can get her to sign the transfer papers before she asks too many questions, we can be out by summer with close to $1 million. See, Cassandra, me. David wasn't planning to stay in our marriage much longer. He'd been setting up an exit strategy, planning to drain my accounts and disappear, leaving me broke and confused while he started the cycle over somewhere else with a new identity. I spent the next day gathering more evidence. I accessed our joint accounts and discovered David had already moved $200,000 of my inheritance into accounts I couldn't track. I found loan documents he'd forged with my signature, credit cards opened in my name that I'd never seen. He'd been systematically positioning himself to take everything while saddling me with debt. I called a lawyer, not a divorce attorney, a criminal defense lawyer who specialized in fraud cases. Her name was Victoria Cross, and her reputation was for being absolutely ruthless. I met her that afternoon, brought every piece of evidence I'd gathered, and laid it all out. Victoria reviewed everything with increasing fascination. Your husband is running a sophisticated con operation. This isn't just infidelity, it's wire fraud, identity theft, possibly money laundering. We're talking federal crimes. I want him prosecuted, I said. But first, I want to expose him. I want every woman he's conned to know the truth. I want everyone in his life to know what he is. Victoria smiled, and it was the kind of smile that made me understand why she was so feared in court. I can work with that. But Cassandra, if we're doing this, we're going all the way. No mercy, no second chances. Are you prepared for how dark this might get? I thought about David's messages, planning to steal my inheritance and abandon me. Thought about the women he'd manipulated, the lives he'd damaged, the lies he'd maintained with such ease. I'm not just prepared, I said, I'm counting on it. Victoria connected me with a private investigator named Marcus Reeves, who specialized in financial crimes and had contacts in law enforcement. Marcus spent 2 days tracing David's financial network and came back with information that was even worse than I'd imagined. David had been running cons for at least 8 years, possibly longer. He had multiple identities, multiple bank accounts, and properties registered under fake names. He was part of a network with Trevor and 3 other men who ran romance scams across the Southeast, targeting vulnerable women with money. Your husband and his partners have stolen an estimated $4.2 million over the past 5 years, Marcus told me, his expression grim. That we can trace. There's probably more. They have a system, build relationships, extract money, then disappear before the victims realize they've been conned. How many victims? I asked, my voice hollow. At least 23 that we've identified, probably more who never reported it because they were embarrassed or didn't realize it was fraud. 23 women, 23 lives were damaged because my husband was a predator who'd turned manipulation into a business model. Victoria had been working with the FBI's white-collar crimes division, sharing evidence from David's phone. They were interested, very interested. Wire fraud, identity theft, racketeering charges. David and his network were looking at serious federal prison time if we could build the case properly. But here's the thing, Victoria said, if we go straight to the FBI with everything, David gets arrested, there's a trial, and it all becomes a legal process. Clean, official, by the book. She paused, studying my face. Or we can destroy him first, systematically, publicly, and then hand him over to law enforcement when there's nothing left of his life to salvage. It's riskier. We have to be careful not to compromise the criminal case, but it's more complete. I want the second option, I said without hesitation. We spent the next week building a plan that was elegant in its cruelty. I would wait for David to come home from his Chicago trip, act completely normal, and gather the final pieces of evidence. Then, on a carefully chosen day when he thought everything was secure, I would execute a coordinated exposure that would destroy every aspect of his double life simultaneously. Marcus helped me access David's computer and clone all his hard drives. We found more evidence: fake IDs, forged documents, detailed spreadsheets tracking the women he was conning and how much money he'd extracted from each. David had been treating fraud like a business, complete with quarterly goals and performance metrics. I also discovered that David's business trips were rotation schedules. He'd spend 3 days with Stephanie in Atlanta, then 2 days with Nicole in Charlotte, then a weekend with Alicia in Nashville. He'd cycle through his marks, maintaining each relationship just enough to keep the money flowing while preventing any one woman from demanding too much time. The most twisted part, he'd been documenting everything: photos of the women, copies of the checks they'd given him, even recordings of conversations where they'd pledged their love or agreed to invest in his fake businesses. He kept these as trophies, proof of his successful cons. I made copies of everything. Then I started creating my own documentation, a comprehensive dossier on David's operation that included every lie, every stolen dollar, every woman he'd manipulated. It was thorough enough for the FBI and devastating enough for public exposure. I also did something Victoria initially advised against but ultimately supported. I created fake profiles and started messaging the women David was conning, not as myself, but as a concerned friend who'd seen their social media posts with Marcus or James and had some troubling information to share. I planted seeds of doubt carefully, suggesting they verify his stories, asking if they'd met his family or friends, mentioning inconsistencies I'd noticed. I wanted them to question him before the exposure, priming them to recognize the truth when it was revealed. 3 days before David was scheduled to return from another business trip, I opened a new bank account at a different bank and transferred all the remaining money from our joint accounts that he hadn't already stolen. I closed credit cards, secured my assets, and made sure he couldn't financially hurt me any further. I also contacted several journalists who specialized in consumer fraud and romance scams. I offered them an exclusive story, a first-hand account from the wife of a man running a sophisticated con operation, complete with documentation and multiple victims willing to speak on record. Everything was in place. The FBI was ready to move when I gave the signal. The journalists had their stories drafted. The woman David had been conning had been primed to see the truth, and I had compiled everything into one devastating package that would destroy him in a single day. David came home on Friday evening, kissing me at the door like he always did, asking about my week with that false concern he'd perfected. I smiled and told him everything was fine, that I'd missed him, that I was glad he was home. He had no idea that his entire world would end in 48 hours. Section. For confrontation revelation, I chose Sunday morning for the exposure. Deliberately, carefully, with maximum impact in mind, David was having coffee at our kitchen table, scrolling through his real phone, probably checking messages from the women he was conning on his other devices. He looked relaxed, comfortable, completely unsuspecting. I sat down across from him with his second phone in my hand. "We need to talk about your other life, Marcus," I said, my voice perfectly calm. The way his face changed was almost beautiful confusion shifting to recognition, shifting to pure panic in the span of 2 seconds. He reached for the phone, but I pulled it back. "Or should I call you James? Or do you prefer David Harrison, the grieving widower?" "Cassandra," I can explain, he started, but I cut him off. Don't. My voice was cold, flat, and empty of emotion. I know everything. The cons, the fake identities, the women you've been manipulating. I know about Trevor and your network. I know about the $4.2 million you've stolen. I know you were planning to take my inheritance and disappear. I watched him calculate, trying to figure out what version of the lie might work, what angle might save him, but I could see the moment he realized there was no way out. How long have you known? He asked, his voice hollow. Long enough to document everything, long enough to secure my assets, long enough to ruin you. I pulled out my laptop and turned it toward him. On the screen was a group text I'd composed to every single contact in his second phone, all the women he'd been conning, all his business associates, everyone in his fake identities. The message was simple and devastating. This is Cassandra Wells, the wife of the man you know as Marcus Chen, James Morrison, David Harrison. I'm writing to inform you that the man you've been involved with is a con artist running an organized fraud operation. He has stolen money from at least 23 women using fake identities and elaborate lies. I have documented evidence of his crimes, which I'm sharing with law enforcement today. If you've given him money or personal information, you are a victim of fraud. I'm attaching documentation proving his real identity and his criminal activity. I'm sorry you were targeted by my husband. Attached are contact details for the FBI agent handling his case. David's face went white as he read it. You can't send that, Cassandra, please. I already did, I said, 5 minutes ago, to everyone on your phone, all your marks, all your network contacts, everyone. I watched my phone light up with responses, women sending shocked messages, confused texts, angry replies. Trevor was calling repeatedly, probably panicking as he realized their entire operation was exposed. That's not all, I continued, and the fear in David's eyes deepened. I've given everything to the FBI. They're building a federal case against you and your network for wire fraud, identity theft, and racketeering. I've also provided documentation to 3 journalists who are publishing exposés about your operation this afternoon. You're destroying me, David whispered. No, I corrected. You destroyed yourself. I'm just making sure everyone knows it. My phone rang. Victoria, calling to confirm. The FBI was executing search warrants on David's properties and the offices where Trevor worked. The network was being dismantled in real time. But I wasn't finished. I had one more twist, something darker than the exposure, something that would haunt David far beyond prison. There's something else you should know, I said, watching his face carefully. Remember 6 months ago when you convinced me to sign those investment documents, the ones you said were for our retirement accounts? He nodded, confused about where this was going. I never signed them. The papers you filed were forgeries, which I can prove because I documented you creating them, which means you didn't just commit fraud against your marks. You committed multiple counts of identity theft and document forgery using my information. His confusion deepened. So, I pressed charges, separately from the FBI case, because while they're prosecuting you for the financial crimes, I made sure they're also charging you with everything you did specifically to me: forgery, identity theft, theft of marital assets. Those charges come with sentences that run consecutively, not concurrently. I leaned forward, making sure he understood. The FBI case might get you 10 to 15 years. My charges add another 5 to 7. You're not looking at a long prison sentence, David. You're looking at potentially 20 years. You'll be 67 when you get out. You'll get out. Why? His voice broke. Why are you doing this? We could have just divorced because you were planning to rob me and disappear, I said, my voice hard. Because you've hurt dozens of women and felt no remorse. Because you're a predator who turned manipulation into a business, but mostly because I have every legal right to pursue justice for what you did to me, and I'm going to exercise that right to its fullest extent. The FBI arrived 20 minutes later with an arrest warrant. I watched them put David in handcuffs, read him his rights, and lead him out of our house. He looked back at me once, and I met his eyes without flinching. Wanted to see regret or sadness or some sign that I still loved him despite everything. I gave him nothing but cold satisfaction. The exposure was more devastating than I'd even anticipated. By Sunday afternoon, David's mass text had gone viral. Several of the women he'd conned were social media influencers or had large online presences. and they shared their stories publicly. The hashtag #ConArtistExposed started trending. Local news picked up the story. The journalists I'd contacted published their articles, complete with photos of David's multiple identities and quotes from victims. David's real employer, the one he actually worked for when he wasn't running cons, fired him immediately. His reputation was destroyed before he even made bail, and bail was set high $500,000 because the judge determined he was a flight risk given his multiple identities and hidden assets. He couldn't make bail. He sat in county jail for 6 months awaiting trial, and according to his public defender, the experience broke him. The man who'd run sophisticated cons and manipulated dozens of people couldn't handle being confined. Powerless, exposed. The FBI case was rock solid. They'd traced money across state lines, documented the network with Trevor and the others, and built a racketeering case that was impossible to defend against. David's lawyer advised him to take a plea deal. He pleaded guilty to 13 federal charges. The sentencing was exactly as I'd calculated: 15 years for the federal crimes, plus 7 additional years for the charges I'd pressed personally, 22 years total. Trevor and the others in the network got similar sentences. The entire operation was dismantled, and the FBI used our case as a blueprint for investigating other romance scam networks. I testified at David's sentencing hearing. The judge asked if I wanted to make a victim impact statement, and I did. My husband wasn't just a criminal, I said, looking directly at David in his orange jumpsuit. He was a predator who studied human vulnerability and exploited it. He didn't just steal money, he stole trust, hope, and dignity from women who'd already been hurt by life. He turned intimacy into a weapon, and love into a con. The man I thought I knew never existed. He was always this person, this calculating predator who saw people as marks to be exploited. I paused, making sure David was looking at me. I don't want mercy for him. I don't want rehabilitation or second chances. I want him to experience exactly what he put his victims through: years of his life stolen, his future destroyed, his identity erased. He took away our ability to trust. Now he gets to live with the consequences. The judge sentenced David to the maximum on every charge. I divorced him while he was in prison, a process that was surprisingly simple given his criminal conviction. I got everything: the house, the cars, what little money remained. His assets were also being liquidated to compensate his victims through a restitution fund the court established. I became an advocate for romance scam victims, working with the FBI and organizations that help people recover from financial fraud. I've helped identify dozens of other con artists, helped women recognize warning signs, and testified in multiple cases. The women David had conned became a support network for each other. Stephanie, Nicole, Alicia, and the others. We formed a group, shared our experiences, and helped each other heal. Some became friends. We all agreed on one thing: we weren't victims anymore. We were survivors who'd taken down a predator. 5 years after David's arrest, I got a letter from him in prison. He'd found out he could write to me since the restraining order had expired. The letter was pathetic, claiming he'd changed, that prison had made him realize what he'd done, that he wanted to apologize and seek forgiveness. I read it once, then fed it through a shredder. Some people might think that was cold, that everyone deserves a second chance, that forgiveness is healing. But I'd learned something from David's exposure and prosecution. Some people don't deserve second chances. Some people are fundamentally predatory, and the only justice is ensuring they can never hurt anyone again. David will be 71 when he's released from prison if he serves his full sentence. His life as he knew it is over. His identity is permanently attached to his crimes. He'll never be able to run cons again, never be able to manipulate vulnerable women, never be able to hurt anyone the way he hurt us. I rebuilt my life from the ground up, found a job I loved, bought a house in my name only, and surrounded myself with people who valued honesty and integrity. I even started dating again, carefully, slowly, with a therapist's help and a clear understanding of warning signs. The man I'm with now knows everything about David, about what I went through, about how I destroyed him. On our 3rd date, he asked me if I ever regretted how far I went with the exposure and prosecution. Never, I said, not for a second. Good, he replied. Anyone who can take down a predator, that methodically, is someone I want in my life. People often ask if I'm afraid David will come after me when he's released, if I worry about revenge, about him trying to hurt me for destroying his life. I'm not afraid, because David isn't dangerous in the physical sense. He's a coward. who only knows how to hurt people with lies and manipulation. And I made sure there's documentation everywhere, a permanent record of what he is. So if he ever tries to rebuild his con artist life, he'll be caught immediately. I found a second cell phone that revealed my husband's double life. I could have just divorced him, could have walked away quietly, could have let him continue conning other women. Instead, I burned down his entire world, exposed every lie, and made sure he faced the maximum legal consequences possible. Some people call that revenge. I call it justice. And I call it the most satisfying thing I've ever done. David thought he could manipulate me forever, that I'd never be smart enough or strong enough to see through his lies. He thought I was just another mark, another victim to exploit and abandon. He was wrong, and he'll have 22 years in a prison cell to think about exactly how wrong he was.